Welcome to the Primal Parenting Podcast, where we bring you the real science so that you can parent with your God-given instincts and apply that to the modern world. Today, my guest is Dr. Aldrich Chan, who is a neuropsychologist, professor at Pepperdine, and the author of the newly released book, 7 Principles of Nature: How We Strayed and How We Return. Welcome, Dr. Chan.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for your work. I was really struck by in your work how your approach is so grounded in Eastern philosophy. And at first glance, parents may not think that Eastern philosophy is relevant to modern parenting. But as we've highlighted primal parenting here on the podcast, there are baselines that human beings are made, designed for. And I found that using Taoism as a foundation really aligns to those baselines. And so I wanted to ask you how you see this incredibly foundational philosophy and just sort of description of being human, in my opinion, how you found that to be the right basis for approaching natural parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to note that was quite incredible to run into is how they conceptualize problems that we face. And these are ancient texts that I'm looking into, right? Like I use the classical text. I'm not getting into the religious portion of it, just the philosophical part that other people can integrate into their systems, life systems, we could say. But one of the major things and ways that they view, for example, conditions when we are suffering from anxiety or depression or some other condition is actually not necessarily the fact that there's something wrong with you, rather that there's a misalignment with principles of nature. And
Exactly.
so that maps on very well with this idea of mismatch theory, right? This idea in evolutionary psychology where, and I know Darsha talks about this quite a bit, and I'm sure your listeners have heard this, but I think it's worth repeating that, 95 up to 99% of our histories has been spent as hunter-gatherers, which is a huge portion, and our biology hasn't changed that much since then. And we're living this tiny percentage of time where life is so different. And so to put it simply, the original conditions that we evolved for are mismatched with the conditions we're living in. And so you'll see all sorts of descriptions about how humans, in the Taoist text I'm referring to right now, how humans are artificially layering, let's say, ideas from their minds and to simplify life in some way or to invent things that can actually inhibit or hinder one's progression when it comes to our natural ways of being. And at this point, it's gotten so far that, well, we've strayed, we could
We
say.
have strayed. Yes. And I think that's what modern parents are coming up against so dramatically is how far what they're being told by the experts and what society is pushing them into in terms of practical parenting practices, how far that has strayed from their natural instincts. And
Mm,
then they are kind of blindsided by all the conflicting information. And your book and as you mentioned, Dr. Darshan Narvai's work, who we've both worked with extensively, we'll link to her as well. But it's really showing parents that no, your instincts are correct and deeply, deeply rooted in what it means to be human and in the real science. So what do you have to say to parents who are being pushed and experiencing that pressure in society, whether it's from extended family or it starts in the hospitals, as we know, to stifle our natural parenting instincts and parent in ways that don't feel natural?
mm, yeah, it's a it's a very important question, right? Part of the challenge here is that, for example, it's not that science is bad in any way, right? Like I just want to be clear about that, that there is a lot of, but science is a methodology. observe, we describe the effects and of what we see. But the problem is that there are papers out there that are published in scientific journals that people take to be completely factual, right? And so they just sort of buy into it without even reading the paper because, a professional has published the paper on it and they have an MD after their name or a PhD. And the problem with believing in or considering something like a paper so factual so quickly is that you can also be misled. Because the
Mhm.
beautiful thing about science is that these papers can be challenged and modified with new data that comes in, right?
Do you think that science is weaponized in mainstream information?
That's a controversial question also. There probably are some, political leanings and biased results that may be sort of pushed out there for reasons related to, let's say, power or money. I mean, I think that we can't rule that out. But I do also have a lot of colleagues who are completely honest and filled with integrity when they publish their papers and are truly writing based off of what they see as correct, not just what they
Absolutely.
believe, right? So we don't want to twist the theories to suit, or we don't want to twist the facts to suit the theories. Rather, we want to twist the theories to suit the facts. And science in and of itself is a progression. It's something that continually changes through time. So, that said, I just had to, I think we had to say that before anything else. But yeah, there is more information now coming out about how our biologies are in reaction or in relationship with others, especially when it comes to parenting. And when you put all this data together and we look at it from an interdisciplinary perspective, which is more important than singling out one specific field and siloing it and saying these are the findings here, but let's look at the findings from multiple perspectives and see where they all converge. And when we approach it from that perspective, then we start to find more and more support for this mismatch in behaviors and in parenting as it relates to quote unquote modern day ways, as well as the ways that kids were parented when they were in hunter-gatherer societies.
Yes, hunter-gatherer societies, as you said, really are the natural model for human development. And that's how we as humans lived for up until the last 1%, as you have said. So it really is the blueprint. And so I think it's for parents just to keep that in mind when they're bombarded by more authoritarian style or harsh practices that are unnatural in parenting, to return to that
Mm.
truth that you've shared is so helpful. When Darsha and I wrote together, we referred to all of these choices and parenting practices as benefits of them as really helping development in a way that optimizes human potential. But I found in your book, you use the word potency in
Mm.
human development. And I wanted to dive into that because that's so powerful. And I think that it's almost leveling up the idea of developing human potential. And that comes from the Taoist, ancient Chinese approach as well, right?
Mm. Yeah. So one of the foundational texts, the Tao Te Ching, right? The De stands for power. It could also stand for virtue. There are multiple meanings to it, and they all work very well. I love the word potency, as you mentioned, because it's powerful. And
Yes,
at the
what we
same
want.
time, yeah, at the same time, it's a good representative of what it's like to follow natural principles, not just in the sphere of development, but also in one's own potential as an adult, right? I think the classic metaphor is someone swimming against the currents, right? That's not gonna, it's hard. It's difficult to do so. If any of you have tried, I'm sure most of you have. But then when you're swimming with it, you just flow with it and you move far faster. And there is that same experience that can be had in our actual lived experience. And the same thing goes for, well, like you said, raising children, right? And working with infants. And, and I'll say this also, this idea of the unnatural, right? Part of the reason why I pivoted towards this direction was the birth of my own son. And there was, similar to lots of people out there, I was basically told that, oh, it's about time for sleep training when you hit like around 6 months or so. And I thought that that was a normal thing to do. I didn't even consider it. that there were alternative means. And I remember the first night that we put him in the room and he was just crying and crying, right? And it was just violating every principle within me. And I felt so extremely flustered, upset, angry, all the above. There was just something yelling out like, this is just wrong. It's just
Right.
not natural to leave your baby in a room and shut the door and let them self-regulate when their cortex isn't even fully developed, not even near, right? And so
Right.
so my wife comes back and she hears him crying also. And we're both sitting in the room looking at each other like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. And then, well, the next day we were like, we can't do that again. It was so wrong and unnatural that we started doing a huge academic search into it. And that's when I really ran into Darsha's work. And then, Darsha recommended I reach out to you for a few things. And of course, I went into your program and tried it out, and it was very helpful. And so everything sort of then started to fall into place, right? And everything from normalizing things like co-sleeping even, right? Or
Yes.
allo-parenting and all of these things that society viewed as off in some way. And now, today, I'm so happy to say my baby is quote unquote very advanced in many respects. And when people ask, how is it possible that your baby's so advanced? I don't just say it's part of the genes, but I think a big part of it is how we raised him. In these more naturalistic conditions, he's swimming with the current now versus swimming against it. And so,
So glad to hear that. Lovely, lovely. And I'll put a link. Thank you for mentioning the Smart Baby Sleep System. I'll put a link to that program. It's one of the examples of how parents can find natural alternatives to what the mainstream tells you to do that doesn't feel right. And I don't know if you've heard this, but I had a friend who had a baby, a newborn baby, just 2 days ago.
mhm.
And he said that in the hospital, they have where they put the baby a sign on the wall that says 2 hours no touch. Uh,
Wow.
they're doing this as a practice, and I'm sure it's obviously coming from top down programs based on those advice to prime parents
Hmm.
to sleep train and to leave the baby to sleep alone. So they're starting right in the hospital with that. It's a strong push toward that, and parents can realize we don't have to do it. They're all alternatives. The baby can get the comforting and the touch, the human contact that they need to
Hmm.
develop, as you said, in the flow. Maybe Dr. Chan, talk about a little more about the benefits of reducing stress in infancy. So when, for example, your son is not exposed to that distress and
Hmm.
spends a great period of time, when our babies spend a great period of time in, how would you describe it neuroscientifically, in
Yeah.
the state where they are calm, how
Yeah.
is that different and cumulative over time in terms of their development?
So I think the first thing I have to mention here would be those, and forgive me again if your audience already knows about this stuff, but studies that they conducted at orphanages, I believe it was in Romania, right?
No, this is
The
excellent. I
first
don't
ones.
think we have covered this.
Okay. Basically, what happened is that there were lots of orphans, and all these orphans were given food and they were given shelter. But there were too many for them to emotionally care for. So there wasn't a lot of holding, there wasn't that sense of touch and feel. It was just, here's a bed, here's some food, that's all you get. What they ended up finding is that there's a disproportionate amount of them that passed away early or had substantial issues as they developed. A great way that it was shared with me from a colleague of mine is that emotional experience is like light, right? Like if your eyes are, and your development is all normal, but your eyes are not exposed to light at a certain age, at a certain time, if you're just, I don't know, let's say hypothetically in a cave, your vision will not develop normally, right? Even if everything was set perfectly beforehand. The same thing is with emotions and emotional connections. It's required physiologically to develop properly. It's a core ingredient that is just as important as food and light and all of these things that other people would not question whatsoever. And so there's a lot of evidence at this point supporting the importance of relationship care and empathy towards children as they grow.
Yes, and that's one of the baselines of primal parenting, companionship, that we're kind of one at the beginning, and that unity and even just physical touch and contact is part of the natural state of what the developmental systems of babies expect. And you mentioned also allo-parenting. Another baseline of primal parenting is community. And I wanted to see what the real science says, in your opinion, the multidisciplinary science about the village, the community. What do babies need, or more specifically, their parents need, in order to give the babies what they need, and young children in their early development?
Yeah. So I think a few things to note here. I think the first one, for those listening who did do sleep training with their kids, it's a result of our loss of allo-parenting.
Mm,
And so I understand why you would have done it in the
yeah.
first place. And I think, if it's happened, it's happened. Just start saving up money for therapy, perhaps if it was really harmful in some way.
Yes,
But
and their allo parent environment was that sign on the wall, and that's all they got, right?
yeah. So one of the things that's important, right? Allo-parenting, why is that and how could that be beneficial? The cool statistics that's been found with, I believe it was the Hadza hunter-gatherers, is
Mm.
that 60% of the baby's time was actually spent with allo-parents, whereas 40% was with their actual parents.
And let's just define real quick allo parents
Oh,
from the science.
right. Well, it's when there are basically multiple parents, or people acting in as parents for a single child, as opposed to just the immediate father and mother, right? And so it really does take a village to raise a child, and that's where the saying really comes from. There's a lot of truth to that. So allo-parenting again, so one of the things it does is it allows the parents to rest and to be capable of matching the child's energy, we could say, and taking care of them so they don't burn out, right? That's one of the main reasons why people do sleep training is because it's just two people that are both probably working quite a bit
Mhm.
to support the one child. And without other family members at least coming in to help out in some way, it becomes very exhausting. And in those situations, maybe it was better that you sleep train because then you may have became a parent that would treat your child more poorly, or it might lead to abusive situations. There are moments when a child is crying or so dysregulated and you're dysregulated, right? So it's very complex. But let me go back to the alloparenting and hunter-gatherer. So what's the benefit? Okay, one of the benefits biologically, they're exposed to more, well, people, meaning that their social skills will likely be better as they
Mm,
grow up, right? More
yes.
people to communicate with, more people to work with. Another thing that's interesting is that, well, let's say you do have two parents and your parents suck. They're not, let's say they're just not very good parents, or they're very self-absorbed, or, well, then you have all those other allo parents that can be examples for you as well. So it could stave off, or at least be a protective factor to some extent for insecure attachment systems, right?
Ah, very good.
Yeah. So that's also interesting. From a more biological perspective, you're exposed to more bacterial colonies and things of that nature. That can, it sounds a little scary, but it actually improves and boosts the immune system, right? So
Excellent.
I think those are three pretty big pillars that are important reasons why alloparenting is at
Yeah.
least worth considering if you're not there yet.
Yes. And so allo-parenting is related to the community baseline, primal parenting, and it can be extended family or the village that you make with your own friends and neighbors locally. In human history, wasn't it often, I'm not sure, but I know you'll know specifically, was it often young, like adolescents, especially girls, that helped a lot with the young children?
Oh, it seems to be the case that boys and girls, and this is another mismatch actually, that was
Mhm.
from a paper from Nikhil Chaudhry, who you might be one to talk to also. He's a Cambridge professor, and he actually lived with some hunter-gatherers. One of the big mismatches is this is independent learning,
Yeah.
where a lot of children would learn, and the exact opposite of helicopter parenting, basically.
Yeah.
But on top of that, a lot of what they would learn experientially would be also through not just adolescent girls, but it was also boys and girls. They would teach the younger ones, and they would often want to help. I mean, anyone who's had as a baby or a kid, they always want to help.
Yes, and the young girls love to just hold the baby, which is so helpful,
Oh,
as you
and
said.
in that sense,
Parents can
okay.
rest, and then I think the adolescents benefit so much from that as well, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, role playing. And we've touched on a bunch of principles actually from the Seven Principles book. There are two major theories, and that someone just let me know that it actually connects quite well. So one's the SAD theory, and then the other one is CPR West. Those are two acronyms for the major theories that this book talks about. The first theory, the SAD theory, is a theory of how we've become misaligned with nature, how we've strayed. So the S stands for separation, the A stands for alienation, and the D stands for discord. So I don't think it's one way or the other, but there are sort of phases. It's in degrees, it's a spectrum. Some people are closer towards nature, some people are further out. The separation portion, just to briefly get into that, is more of a neuropsychological theory. As a neuropsychologist, it's something that was important to me, and it's the development of two networks in your brain, the default mode network, your resting state brain network, and something called the central executive network, both involved with suspending the immediacy of space and time or experience, right? Like if you ever started to daydream or your mind wandered, you have decoupled or separated from what's happening now, right? Sometimes someone says something and you're like, oh, I didn't hear what you said, right? Well, it's because your mind wandered off. And how is it wandering off? Because we have these networks, right? So that's the separation. And separation doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. It's just a natural thing, actually. But things that are separate can be in harmony, like an orchestra or a band, or can be in discord, right? And so
Yeah.
that's where the alienation comes in. The alienation relates to mismatch theory that we kind of talked about a little bit. And also that the discord starts talking about the introduction of deeper meaning systems that are continually echoed through society that are having us actually not even just feeling dissonant even with natural principles, but actually it's like people going to the forest and they just hate going to nature, right? Or like something that just appears very unnatural.
Mhm.
So, biggest one here, by the way, this is important, is the separation between mind and body, right?
Yes, I wanted to get much more into that in terms of physical health and the mind
Mhm.
body connect interplay. But I see your book in the background there, The Seven Principles of Nature. When you read this book, it's really making you a better person, understanding yourself, more self-actualized, and that's so beneficial in parenting. There are there's so many aspects of this book that literally make you a better person. I think when you read it, you understand humanity, that you understand yourself as a person and as a parent and in relation to others and nature, of course, but also showing you why you have these instincts, why your instincts are important, why your instincts are rooted in relationship and how they benefit relationships and how that makes you more whole, more fully human.
Mhm.
So, yeah, this really unique, Dr. Chan, and it's very important because it's going to validate parents in their instincts and allow them
Mhm.
to parent in the way that is best for the children.
Yeah. You mentioned this a few times now, this sort of theme of following your instincts. I think
Mhm.
it's worth mentioning here. Um, so there's a whole section on intuition. I speak
Yeah,
about intuition rather than instinct. One for me is a little more biological. The other one we could say is both psychophysiological. And so for intuition, science for a long period of time has sort of rejected intuition as something that important. But now there are so many new theories that are coming out and so much more evidence in support of intuition. But the question becomes, in what context is intuition most helpful, right?
great.
And so a few things. The very practical thing to say here, and this comes from a sort of review of the literature, is between intuition and analysis. Intuition will outperform analysis when there are too many uncertain variables, okay? And when the problem is complex, which is, I think,
Wow.
most actually of what we encounter
Yes.
throughout life.
Amazing.
Whereas analysis will outperform intuition when the problem is simple or complex, but the variables are all known.
Mm,
Okay. So, I
okay.
mean, think of like a math problem that you're trying to solve or whatever. Like intuition's not going to solve that, you
Right,
know?
right,
And the reason is twofold. I mean, one is that our conscious system, when it's analyzing things, it's very linear, A to B to C to D, whereas our intuition is far more rapid and non-linear and operates more with this right hemisphere bias that allows for very associative thinking, divergent thinking, and connectivity amongst many different regions that can provide us with an experience that moves us in one direction or the next. It's called the somatic marker theory. It's this one area of the brain called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, and it's a convergence zone of multiple signals. And Damasio has done studies with these and his colleagues, whereby people are making decisions in uncertain situations. And well, what they find is that what led someone to pick one thing over another is this area lighting up alongside this somatic or bodily experience, showing that intuition is definitely not blind. It's actually very well informed,
Mhm.
because it's drawing information from many areas and very fast, so fast that our consciousness or our conscious experience can't keep up with it, right? So going back to parenting and your intuition about what's happening, like the what I described about my child crying and me feeling it's not
Yes.
natural, it's because we've inherited these evolutionary systems, all these primal emotions and so forth that have been evolving for millions and millions of years, and they're present with us for a reason. We feel scared and angry or panic or grief, all because they are very deeply embedded in our brains, right? And so when a response as archetypal, we could say, as a baby crying in a room, those are separation distress calls, right? And
Mhm.
what we know in the science, if there is a separation distress call and you don't answer that call, and you don't answer that call, and they continue to cry and panic and so on and so forth, what's going to happen? It slides into grief and turns into major depression, right? Or
Wow.
even worse, right? This is all, it's literally a primary emotional system from the work of Jaak Panksepp. So,
Right, exactly. And it reminds me also of Dr. Alan Shore's work, who
mm,
used multidisciplinary science to map those, he would say, emotional environments of distress to mental illnesses, right?
mm, hmm yeah,
Yes. So your intuition was screaming at you, and the intuition is right. It's valid.
hmm
You have a whole chapter on intuition. That's beautiful.
yeah. It's a fun one because it's intuition in the way that we talked about it right now, but there's also this idea of moral intuition.
Mm.
That's really fascinating to me.
What do you want to say about that?
I will just say I looked at studies looking at rats, at apes, and at babies. And there are all sorts of fascinating studies looking at all of them. And basically, it's finding that morality is not just a social construction. While experience is necessary to, let's say, develop moral systems, these moral systems are really born with us. Like there are lots of studies that show nonverbal babies that will, for example, choose a helpful toy more often than choosing a toy that was mean in some way. Or like if you violate a condition where a baby is, again, pre-linguistic baby is viewing a video, let's say, of two kids getting food, right? And every time one kid is given way more food and the other kid is not given anything, that violated situation, the babies are just staring at it like there's something off here. There's something wrong. This doesn't make sense.
Wow.
It's
I
it's
love
really
that.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And
Love
even
that.
finding it in rats and other apes, it really creates this moral landscape that seems to be embedded in many social life forms.
That's beautiful. I was thinking of dogs because often dogs get very upset with roughhousing because they're like
Mm-hmm.
they have an instinct about not wanting people to get hurt, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the book is Seven Principles
Yeah.
of Nature.
So yeah, the seven principles. We have the CPR West, right? So the C is creativity, the P is process, the R is relationship. That's the one that we spent the most time on. And then the W is wholeness, the E is equilibrium, the S is spontaneity, and the T is transformation. And all of these you can find at every level of analysis, at least as far as I can discern. And another way to look at it is this idea that, for example, the principle of creativity, what is that? It's a principle of nature, but what does that mean to humans? Well, these principles invites a certain way of being, right? And the principle of creativity would invite us to be more accepting, let's say,
Mm,
of as
yes.
something as it presents to us. The principle of process invites attunement. Attunement to what? Well, the present or what's happening in the moment. Whether if you're thinking about the future, think about the future. If you're thinking about the past, think about the past. Relationship invites us to be compassionate and to care for each other. It's really this idea of not necessarily just treating others as you would treat yourself, but the slogan, when we mix it with Taoist literature, is to treat others as they would like to be treated.
That's beautiful. There's a whole chapter on creativity.
Mm.
And does that apply also to education and learning?
The way that I talk about it in the book is more related to emotion regulation and ways in which, like, if we're confronting change or uncertainty. So I'd like to say change is the action of creativity. And one of the major problems that we face is a fear of uncertainty, right? And so lots of kids also fear uncertainty. And it's understanding uncertainty from a particular context that allows us to better regulate ourselves, right? So this idea, for example, that without uncertainty, there is no adventure, right? Certainty is the death of a question.
I think you talk about exploratory learning and the nature of child development. How
Yeah.
can that inform education?
Yeah, so the exploratory learning, again, it's also founded upon a review paper looking at core mismatches between hunter-gatherer societies and our own. Especially when children are younger, they are just little creative bundles
Yes.
of joy and wonder, and they can have so much fun in a room where you can get bored so quickly as you sit there. It's something that we lose as adults. I think more related to learning beyond exploratory learning is really the S or the spontaneity, principle of spontaneity, which invites play. And to me, play is one of the most important learning tools for
Yeah.
children, allowing them to play, not degrading play. Some people think, oh, don't play, that's for kids or whatever, right? Like, I think play is just as important for adults as for kids. And in fact, it's considered a primary emotional system again from the work of Jaak Panksepp. It's like, well, what does play do? What do you mean that play is helpful? Well, kids are playing mommy or playing dad,
Yeah.
right? Or they're playing
Yeah.
doctor, playing lawyer. They play all sorts of roles because it allows them to, well, to learn and experience what it might be like, right? And it's also in a way that they're their authentic self. They're genuine. They're not putting on a facade. Like when you're in play states, you suddenly lose sometimes this sort of idea of space and time, and you're just, oh my God, where did the time go? It was so fun. It was so amazing. So play is sets a mindset that is ideal for learning. It also, if you put a bunch of children together and they play together, it'll automatically establish a social hierarchy in some ways. It also teaches morality because if someone is playing in a way that is unfair
Mhm.
and cheating, they're going to get rejected from the group, right? And they'll learn, oh, I should probably not do that again in the future, right? Or someone's
Yeah.
too aggressive, or all of these things can come up naturally in play.
And in that way, it's developing the social development as well.
Social skills and empathy. Yeah.
Yes. And it's bonding. Isn't activating the play system and the play state also bonding?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So all
Absolutely.
that good emotional, social, and emotional intelligence is
Right.
happening during play.
Yeah.
So
And
yes.
just to contrast this, right?
Mhm.
There's also other ways to learn that involve stress, right?
Ah,
And I think these are sort of dominant modes that are now being challenged to some degree, where kids are burning out in these private schools
yeah.
and other schools, right? Because the material is too difficult and they're not learning the emotional tools to regulate or learning things about life that allows them to have a meaningful existence as they move through it. It's actually one of the reasons I created a program called the SAGE program that teaches those skills that schools are still not teaching, self-regulation, attunement, and so forth. But yeah, there is this idea of learning in a serious environment, and sometimes that can be useful, but for large extents, that is sort of again trying to force nature into an artificial environment, right?
Yes.
Um, and
Yes.
finally, the last thing I'll just say about this is embodied play, embodied learning, right?
Mhm.
Movement is so important and can be so helpful to learning.
This is excellent. I had pulled a quote, I think that you just spoke to. Yes, you said enriched environments optimize neural circuitry for resilience and learning. That was a huge part of what the science shows about the hunter-gatherer societies, right? That's how they learned.
Yeah, so it's an interesting mix of the two. I mean, let's say imagine hunter-gatherers in nature. Nature is an enriched environment. I mean,
Mhm.
there's so much to learn in nature. All these different types of trees and plants, what's edible, what's not edible, things that you cut and so forth. I don't want people to think that an enriched environment is just hoarding a bunch of toys and continually exposing your children to like tons of toys and here, just this, and that, because that could actually I think indirect, not even indirectly, I would say directly impact their attentional systems. It's just kind of like how social media and other technologies are capitalizing on attention and impacting our attentional systems in ways that we don't even know yet, right? And so I think the same thing can happen with sensory overload or overstimulation, right? Because part of what happens, there's this game in improvisation where I hold up this stylus, right? And what you do is you pretend you go in a circle, and each person has to pretend the stylus is something else, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
have
great.
it's a fun one, you know. So, okay, so this is a it's a oh it's a cigarette. Oh, okay. Oh,
Huh?
it's a pencil. Oh, it's a rocket. You come up with all of these different variations of a single thing, and in a way, that is beneficial, right, to cognitive flexibility and being able to entertain yourself ultimately also, even if you're presented with just a toy or two. It's not like a lot of these hunter-gatherer children had tons of toys. In fact, it was the opposite. They didn't have that much stuff. But
Right.
part of the capacity here is being able to adapt ourselves a little bit more towards developing their imagination and their creativity when they're not overstimulated or continually exposed to all of this stimulus, which includes, again, computer games and all that stuff.
Hmm. Okay, so parents should just focus more on getting the good types of enriched environment and limiting the screens.
Yeah, I mean, of course, experiential moments and activities are, I think, a best. Since I've talked about play, right, and embodied learning, right? So community gatherings, dances, festivals, things like that can be all enriched environments in many ways. Or, going to an art studio and learning how to paint and things like that, I think are great. But I guess the only thing I'm cautioning is continually buying your child toys, and it's like a never-ending conveyor belt, and they keep asking for more. And because I know some parents that kind of do that, like they just keep on
Yeah,
giving and giving, and it's just, and it's amplified and made worse when they're watching all this social media and I want to see a movie, I want to see a show, and it's like, oh, okay.
right, right. It's limiting their creativity and their social interaction. And that was in your intro, believe in your book, you had highlighted some of the main sort of developments, the most recent scientific understandings about development. And that was one of them because you're a neuropsychologist, is the way the brain development, the way the neurocircuitry develops. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, again, because it's such a foundational ingredient, we could say, to our development. And remember, when we're born, we only have 30% of our brain.
Mhm.
You know, the other 70% develops after birth, and that means in relationship to our experiences, in relationship to our caregivers. Our caregivers and allo parents, they become a sort of prosthetic prefrontal cortex for us that can help
Wow.
us regulate our emotions. And so we go as far as our parents do, and hopefully we transcend them in some way once we learn from what we learn in the environment and so forth. So a large percentage of, I would say, cortical development is going to be contingent upon emotional connection and social engagement. If we talk about empathy circuits, I
Mhm.
mean, temporal parietal junction, the default mode network is also when we play with others, taking turns, learning how to delay gratification versus, again, going back to what I said about kids that are continually receiving toys or they get immediate gratification all the time. They lose that capacity for delayed gratification. And we know delayed gratification plays or is a very good predictor of actually success in the future in many respects. And so that's also something to consider. And for the people interested in the brain there, part of the area that's very developed there is called the orbital frontal cortex behind the orbits that's involved with inhibition or silencing activity that's coming from the bottom up.
That's so fascinating because I think parents don't realize the neurodevelopment aspect of it that is actually forming how the brain works in such important ways. Impulse control is one of the highest predictors of criminal tendencies, right? If you don't have that strong impulse and inhibition, delayed gratification circuitry. So it's literally shaping the brain. I think that's so powerful. And I didn't want to let you get away without talking about the physical health and how that is so important to neural development. You spend a lot of time in the book emphasizing in really illuminating ways how important nutrition and physical health specifically. Let's talk about gut health. You mentioned the microbiome, and how does that influence mental health?
Yeah, so this is also one of the beautiful convergences between Taoist philosophy and science today. Um, the first thing to note, right, is in Taoism, they sort of have these three sacred areas, we could say, that the dantians, the brain, around the heart region, and also the abdomen. And what we know in science today is that, yes, we have a gut brain, so-called gut brain, the second brain, where there are more nerves moving upwards from the gut to the brain than the brain to the gut, and it's all being connected through the vagus nerve, which is the only cranial nerve to descend into the gut. And we know that alterations in gut microbiome can actually lead to changes in mood, in cognition, and even personality. And when we look at different conditions like OCD and all these other ones, we find also different microbiomes that seem to be leaving a pattern. And so now there are more and more studies that are coming out in relationship to how the microbiome may be altered in some way, or changed or intervened, that may assist with these different conditions. The heart has also been considered quite an important zone. It doesn't have as much research, but people with heart conditions tend to have executive dysfunction. So yeah, that's very, very common. And I know that there's this Heart Math Institute, a little controversial, but there are some studies there that tend to show that it is related also to mood in some ways. The important thing here is that we cannot separate the body from the mind. As I mentioned to you in the discord portion of the SAD theory, the separation of mind and body was tragic. Because when you think that everything pure about yourself and virtuous is in your mind, or quote unquote soul, but then everything bad about you is in your body, that's a terrible formula. You're going to be, in perpetual conflict with yourself, because we exist in bodies, and we express ourselves through our bodies. And people who don't take care of their bodies are going to have a mind. Well, again, I'm putting mind with body now, but to separate it, a mind that may not be as sharp, or as happy, or as joyful, or the list goes on.
Yeah,
So,
this is so amazing. And your book describes it so beautifully. We kind of know instinctively, back to instinct, because we have these sayings like, I had a brave heart, or
mhm,
my heart told me this or that, right?
yeah,
And those aren't just parabolic, right? They're actual, they're real. And
yeah.
I know from ancient Indian, like Ayurveda also recognizes this. So
Mm.
I love how your book is rooting everything about humanity into the most ancient teachings, and showing parents that this science that you're bringing is
Mm.
actually so deep in our human history.
And let's just note here, Angela, right, that there was no science 3,000 or
Right.
2,500 years
But
ago.
how did they know
How
that?
did they know that? Well, their intuition. That's
Exactly.
where it's coming
Beautiful.
from. They're trying to express what they intuitively experienced, and perhaps what they observed in nature. And that's precisely what the Taoist philosophy was really about. And even in Chinese, when we refer to mind, we actually say heart mind.
Heart mind. I read
Yeah.
that in your book.
Mm, yeah. And one more thing, when it comes to exercise, it's so important. And I think I want to give some more practical things for your audience here.
Yeah.
When we look at, again, the Hadza are just so well studied that I know more about them than the others, but they're averaging around, well, apparently between the ages of 18 to 75. Basically, it's about 14,500 steps, with males being more like 18,000 steps, and then females being a little less. Whatever you average them out, it's around 14,500. Some people say those estimates are a little off. It should be higher, like 20,000. It kind of depends on what study you're looking at. But in any case, considering that variability, when we look at Western folks, we look at ourselves, the average amount of steps taken per day is 4,500, right?
Hmm.
And so,
Wow.
okay, so we have these two extremes. And again, I'm not proposing, and the very first thing I think I wrote in the book was, I'm not proposing for us to return to become hunter-gatherers. I want us to conserve the amazing knowledge and wisdom that they carry and integrate it into our modern world, so that we can live in a way that's biophilic, we could say.
Exactly.
And so let's look at this is a perfect example. Okay, 14,500 and 4,500. What's in the middle is the ideal amount of steps encountered by science, which is around 7,000 actually to 10,000 steps being ideal for our health conditions.
Also, I believe in your book, you said that they have, despite all of our technological advances, that hunter-gatherer societies have more leisure time.
Yeah, yeah.
I was surprised to see that. And that's important, right? For
Hmm, hmm.
community.
Yeah, that was a quite surprising fact to me as well, because the whole point of us coming up with technology is to allow ourselves to focus on more, let's say, complex topics that we could think about while making things easier for us. So perhaps we could have more leisure time and not work as hard. The slogan people like to use these days, right? Work smart, not hard, right?
Yes.
But most people are not. Most people are just working hard, right?
Yes, it hasn't worked out that way.
Right, right. So
So true. Yes. So I highly recommend this book. It's growth for parents. And the more we grow as parents, it's not only informing our practices with our kids, but it's making us a better vessel to develop them because they are developing in reflection with us interpersonally. And that's one of the most important takeaways, I think, from your book. We'll link your website, obviously, but is there a preferred place where you prefer people to get your book from?
yeah, sure. I'll send you a link. It's one of those quote unquote genius links. So it doesn't
Okay.
matter where you live. If you click the link, it should bring you to the right place.
Perfect. And this is, again, 7 principles of nature, how we strayed and how we return. And it explores the interplay of psychology, neuroscience, and Eastern philosophy. And to me, I think it's incredibly valuable and unique for child development parenting. So thank you so much, Dr. Chan, for being with us
Sure.
today. I really
Thank you so much
appreciate
for having me.
everything you're doing.
I appreciate it.